going to introduce our speaker now. So this month's topic is stress, which is kind of apt after what month are we in now? 4 of lockdown, 4 or 5 of lockdown. I'm sure there's been a lot of versions of stress from my little inner circle of friends and connections and compadres and family. I know there's been various stresses. But the official definition of today's topic is, in the space between the stimulus and response, take some of the spotlight away from stress. So August's theme is stress, and the Warsaw chapter over in Poland designed this lovely graphic, and Benjamin illustrated the scene. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Lizzie Paish, who you'll all recognise from our talk. Where are you, Lizzie? Ready?
Yes. Can you
Excellent.
see me? Yeah.
I can see you.
Yeah.
Take it away, Lizzie Paish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I think it was over a year ago, Tim, that you asked me to do this talk, or at least it probably was a year ago. I remember Yvonne coming up to me and going, "Get your name down for that talk on stress." So it's been a long time coming, but here we are finally. So yeah, I know some of you and some of you that I don't know so well, but I'm a transformational coach and trainer, and I work with groups and individuals. Particularly, I work a lot with women at midlife, like me, but also with young people who are struggling with stress and anxiety and all things that go with that, but actually with people of all kinds. So, you know, if you're a man, I also work with men. But the nature of my work of what I call transformational coaching is that underpinning that is an understanding that actually change can happen quickly and quite dramatically. Because I think we're used to thinking that change happens only in very small steps and kind of incrementally. But, you know, I see my clients move from stress and unhappiness to lives of possibility and greater enjoyment surprisingly quickly, and it's just wonderful to see people kind of make this vertical jump rather than sort of incremental change. So I want to kind of bring that understanding to this talk about stress in particular. So what this talk isn't is, I'm not going to be kind of exploring the science of stress. I'm sure, you know, we've heard a lot about all these things before, haven't we? You know, what actually physically happens in our body and those kind of things. But neither is it really going to be a collection of strategies for you about how to handle stress, because again, there's plenty of that kind of information around. And what I really want to do today is to encourage you to think about stress in a different way. And hopefully in doing, you'll be able to take something away that's really helpful to you. So it's not a talk about what should I do, but more about going behind the scenes and looking at how does my mind actually work, and how can I get the best from it and understand it differently. Because, you know, what we tend to do, we like to fix stuff, don't we, as humans? And we tend to go straight to those "what should I do" questions. I'm stressed. What should I do when I'm stressed? And to me, that's a bit like kind of getting in the car for your first driving lesson and saying, "Where should we go?" And, you know, it's pretty pointless, because until you know actually how the car works and how to use it at its best, you're not going to go anywhere without kind of lurching and stalling and crashing into stuff. And so actually, you know, what we're used to is going straight for that "what shall I do" question. You know, that's what we're taught, all sorts of strategies and what to do, without looking at those bigger questions of what's actually going on, or, you know, how does my mind or how does life actually work. So that's the nature of my work, is helping people to see for themselves how their minds work, which then impacts everything. And I have a program that I teach to young people in school, and obviously I work with all sorts of people around that. Because, you know, I'm sure you all can see around you that we seem to have a epidemic almost of stress and mental health problems currently. And, you know, most mental health issues, when you look at them, have some element of stress within them. And our current model really is all about handling the symptoms of that. And we're kind of identifying more and more different ways in which people can be struggling with stress and mental health problems. But without really understanding what's going on, why stress happens and what it really means, you know, that's like engaging in some giant game of whack-a-mole, trying to sort of handle all these outcomes, when there's really a kind of underlying misunderstanding about how our feelings are created in the first place. So as I talk this morning, I just encourage you to listen with an open mind. Because what we're listening is, you know, we're listening for new information, and, you know, oh, this is a bit like that, or oh, this is different, or this doesn't sound like I agree with it, or I do agree with it, or then our intellectual minds get very, very kind of involved in pigeonholing and analysing. So I encourage you just to kind of sit back and let my words kind of wash over you, a bit more like listening to music, and just see if you get a sense of, is there something here that makes sense? So how do our minds really work? Well, in exploring that, I just want to really start off with how it really looks as if our minds work, because this is the model that we're currently kind of engaged with. And our whole kind of medical and mental health system and understanding is sort of built on this. So it looks, doesn't it, as if there's a world out there that we live in, and it exists in a certain way, and then we experience that, and we experience it. And that being the case, it seems as if there are certain situations that are intrinsically stressful and others that aren't. And whilst we kind of can see that there are individual variations within that, it sort of seems like we can't get away from that fact. Like, exams are stressful, you know, losing your job is stressful, having a sick parent is stressful, or child, and, you know, but these things aren't. And we've kind of taken that as read. So it looks like how we feel is caused by these outside circumstances, people or situations, that even kind of our genetic predisposition, it's like, oh, well, that's just how I am, or our personality, you know, that I just am like that. I call that an outside thing as well, because it's outside of how I think it actually works. So given that model, we tend to put all our attention, whether person or organization, on trying to change those situations, those circumstances, those people, to make ourselves feel better, to make ourselves feel less stressed. So if I can control the world enough, then I will feel better. But, you know, you can see from looking at, probably it's easier to see by looking at other people, and certainly people who are experiencing things like OCD to try and control their stress, that you can sort one thing, but something else is always coming up. So if you're prone to stress, you can sort out a circumstance, but you'll just be stressed about something else. You leave one job, you go to another, the stress comes back because it's not coming from the circumstances. So it reminds me of this proverb, which I really love, which is, either you can cover the entire world with leather, or you make yourself shoes. So it's easier to take your leather and do something to cover your own feet than to try and sort out the entire world so that it doesn't have any sharp edges on it. And how I understand that is that wearing shoes, to me, looks like knowing how our minds actually do work. Because when we look to ourselves, then we don't have to kind of fix everything else in the world, which, as you can see, is very stressful and exhausting. So let me just have a sip of my water. So what I want you to consider is that in this equation of there's a world out there giving me feelings, is that there's a missing link that we usually fail to consider. And the missing link is thought. So I just want you to kind of consider the fact that all of our experience is actually brought to us through the power of thought. So we take in stuff through our senses, things are happening out there, but our brain has to process that to give us an experience. That's, you know, scientifically how we work. And that what that means is that we're actually experiencing our thinking. And as it's interesting to see how scientific research is showing more and more clearly how that our brain just actually makes stuff up. So we take things in through our senses, and then our brain is actually filling the gaps. So a great example of this is I took an elderly friend of mine to the optician because he's got macular degeneration. And the optician explained how there are actually huge gaps in Ray's retina where he's just not getting any image. But when he looks out at the world, he doesn't see an image with gaps in it because his brain just extrapolates and fills in the space with, you know, what it thinks would be there given what's around it. Well, that's actually what we're doing all the time with our thinking. We take bits of evidence and we extrapolate. So an example of that is a friend of mine who'd she decided that because of something that had happened in a staff meeting, that everyone had turned against her and that nobody liked her at work, and they were all kind of ganging up on her in the background. I think this was based on kind of a couple of raised eyebrows at some point and somebody who hadn't returned a text. So she had a couple of bits of evidence and she'd filled in the gaps. And then when I spoke to her, she said she decided that I'd turned against her as well because I hadn't texted for 10 days. So, you know, she had this teeny weeny little bit of evidence and she'd made up a story and was feeling extremely stressed about it. So, you know, we're constantly doing this. That's maybe an extreme example, but we are making stuff up the whole time and we look at it and think it's real. We experience thought as if it's what's going on out there. So here's the alternative model of how our minds actually work. So yes, of course the world exists and there are people and things going on out there, but there's no actual objective reality to what it's like, whether it's stressful or not stressful, whether it's terrifying or not terrifying, whether it's fun or not fun. There is no objective reality to that. We individually make that up for ourselves. And if you look around you, you can see that happening. And then we feel what we're thinking. So we think stuff about the outside world, we feel that. And that feeling can be thinking about what's coming in as live data from our senses. We can also be feeling thought about the past, the future, stuff that's never happened, stuff that will never happen, stuff that happened 20 years ago, and we feel that too. So given that we're feeling thought and not circumstances, there is nothing that is intrinsically stressful or not stressful. This missing link of thought is constantly creating our feelings and our interpretation of situations. And so there is nothing outside of us that can actually cause a feeling in us or give us a feeling of any kind. So this understanding that I work with people around is sometimes known as the inside out understanding, or some people call it the three principles of mind, consciousness and thought. But, you know, I'm not going to go into the detail of all of that today. But what I'm not asking you to do is I'm not giving you something to try and believe in. I'm not asking you to kind of believe what I'm telling you. That's a waste of time. But what you might want to do is to just start looking around you and seeing, could this be how it actually works? Just noticing how that actually happens and collecting evidence for yourself, and see whether by testing it out, you can see that life actually does work this way, that there is no situation that can just give you a feeling. There's always thought involved. And, you know, a great example of seeing how we experience thought is that, you know, if I just mention my dental treatment where the dentist was drilling into a nerve, you know, we immediately kind of start to feel our skin crawl just at the thought of that. Or we can I'm sure all experienced a situation where there's something on your mind that you just can't get rid of, that you're stressed about, worked up about, you know, you're just like, it's there, you can't get rid of it. And then a crisis happens, you know, your child ends up in A&E, or you have an accident of some kind, and suddenly it's gone. Your mind, it's not in your mind anymore when it was just completely present, because thought has had to go somewhere else. Now, you might say, well, that's all very well, that, yeah, right, then I'm not feeling stressed about it because something else has got in the way, but the issue hasn't gone away. And that's true, the thing that you were feeling stressed about hasn't gone away. But what I'm trying to distinguish between is stuff in the world that needs sorting out and our feelings of stress. And these are two distinct things. But we tend to conflate them, we get them mixed up, we see them as if they're the same. It's like, you know, there's this thing in the world and my feelings about it, and the two can't be separated. But that confusion makes it harder to do what we need to do, because when our mind's going crazy with a load of excess thinking about a situation, it's very hard to actually handle that situation in the best way possible. When our mind quiets down, we access new ideas, fresh thinking, better ways of handling a situation. A lovely example of this is an example that a colleague of mine gives about giving a talk a bit like this about stress and how our minds work to a room full of people. And a guy stood up and said, well, I don't know, you know, I don't know how you can say that. I work with parents of children who have been diagnosed with terminal illnesses. And are you telling me that I should just tell them that what all they're feeling is thought? And my colleague said, no, of course I'm not telling you that. You know, that would be really cruel and unhelpful. But what I'm telling you is that there's a big difference between having a child who's dying and having a child who's dying. And I think that's a great example, because in a situation like that, of course, we're going to feel grief and sadness and regret and all of those things. But when we feel that alongside that, this stress and worked upness just has to come as part of the package, then it's much harder to access those deeper feelings of love and compassion and even acceptance. So, you know, being able to separate out those two things is really makes a big difference. So, you know, when we think that every time something exists in a way that should be different and is unsatisfactory, and that it's inevitable then that we'll be stressed, then we feel like we're stuck with it until that thing goes away, and we get very busy trying to deal with it. And often we even feel that the stress is an important part of motivating, but I really don't believe that that's the case. I think we always perform better when we're not stressed, when we've got a clear mind. You know, we're not talking about that quick burst of adrenaline to kind of get you through a situation. We're talking about that, you know, sustained stress where something's going over and over in your mind. And, you know, people often describe that to me as like a washing machine in their head, or, you know, that being on a hamster wheel. You know, when our heads feel really full and we're in this overdrive of thinking, of stress thinking, we are not at our best. We're not thinking clearly. And basically, we've just got too much thinking. But what's our typical response to that situation, that stressed situation? More thinking. Well, you cannot solve a thinking problem with more thinking. It just doesn't work that way. If the problem is too much thought, adding more to the mix is never going to help. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is to look to improving our state of mind rather than changing the circumstances. And it's a bit like, you know, what we're doing when we're stressed is, it's like taking us to a snow globe and shaking it up. We're already shaken up, and then we're going, I really need this to settle down. I really need to see this more clearly. I really need to sort this out. How can I get this clearer? Come on, it doesn't seem to be getting very clear. And of course, we know that all we really need to do is just put it down, and the glitter will settle, and we get the clear image. That's what we need to be looking to do with our thinking. The being worked is the problem. The thing we think is the problem. He wants to know. Well, as I said at the beginning, you know, I'm not here to give you a bunch of techniques. And the reason is that techniques actually can just be like another load of thinking to add into the mix. Oh yeah, I need to do that breathing thing. Oh yeah, I need to do that thing that calms you down. It's like, I'm not saying that can't be helpful, but what I'm talking about is going behind the scenes and seeing something differently that actually makes a difference across the board. And what people often say to me is, you know, oh, nothing's changed, but everything looks different, not just in this area of my life, but in all sorts of different areas of my life. So how do we go behind the scenes? Well, when you know that something will have a bad result, when you really know that, you tend to avoid it, don't you? So one of my highest ever open rates on an email recently had the subject line, would you poke yourself in the eye with a sharp stick? No, we wouldn't poke ourselves because we know what would happen. You know, yes, I've never done it, but I have a pretty good idea what that would feel like. So I keep sticks well away from my eyes. We take care not to drive our car off the road because we're pretty confident that if we did, we might well get hurt. I don't stick my hand in the lawnmower while it's going because that's not going to end well. So when I really know how something works and what's going to happen, then I avoid it, or I do what makes sense. So that's why it's a really beneficial exploration to see for yourself that your thinking is the cause of your bad feelings. Because the more you get to see that, the more it just does not make sense to keep revving up your thoughts more and more and thinking harder and harder to try and feel better. And that's the work that I do, helping people to see that for themselves so that it actually makes sense. They see how the system works, and then we just automatically fall in with that system, just like we don't stick our hand in the lawnmower. So I think stress is actually a signal to us that we've moved into this unhelpful, revved up, frantic way of thinking. Yes, there's definitely something in the outside world that's kind of got us thinking like that. But we need to first pay attention to our state of mind, because when we're able to settle down, then we can see more clearly what needs doing about that thing. And sometimes, to be honest, the answer is nothing. Sometimes there is something, but whatever the case, I can make a better call on that when my mind is in a calmer state. So I wonder if you've ever kind of considered that stress might actually be a helpful sign. Just like pain for the body, you know, you touch something hot, you move your hand away. That's what pain is for. And that stress is a sign for our minds like that to stop doing what we're doing, to slow down, to find another way of actually seeing this situation rather than just trying harder and harder to change the circumstances, which gets our mind busier and busier and leads to more stress. When we realize it's our thinking, our unhelpful thinking, that's the problem, our priority then is to find a way to settle that down. And then something new comes through. You know, we have this superpower of new good ideas that can come through. You know, I bet you, like most people, you get your best ideas, new insights, you know, when you're in the shower or walking the dog or out for a run or something like that. Not when you're going, oh, I really need an answer to this within the next 5 minutes. You know, our minds work better. We can access something new when we're quieter. So if you want to take away a tip from this morning's presentation, just start by becoming aware of your thinking. Just start to notice what's going on. Because controlling your thinking, I don't think is a good idea. Difficult and takes lots and lots of effort and more thought. But developing a new relationship with your thinking, recognizing how it works and therefore not taking it so seriously, noticing how you're making stuff up and revving stuff up, that is really helpful. So what we tend to do is we have a thought and we tend to kind of let it escalate, or maybe not even let it escalate. We escalate it into a full-blown thought attack, where, you know, and we bring in the past and the present and all of that, and we get ourselves really, really worked up. So I'm just going to share my screen. I just want to show you an example of this. So bear with me just a moment. Getting that. Okay. So this example is about my daughter, with her permission. So my daughter has, she just graduated this summer, so she did her finals from her bedroom. Can you see my screen, by the way? Yeah. So she did her final exams, and, you know, it was all right, you know, a certain amount of work toughness about it, but it wasn't too bad. And then, you know, it was all submitted, fine. And then the next day she had a thought, and the first thought she had was, I don't think I got all those questions right, you know, that I probably could have improved on that. Well, who hasn't had that thought after they've taken an exam? You know, that's pretty standard, isn't it? And pretty harmless. But then along comes the next one. Oh, I don't think I'll do very well in this exam. Now, at that point, yeah, okay, well, again, we all have those thoughts. But what we then tend to do is we think, oh yeah, let me take a closer look at that. Let me think more about that. So she got thinking more. So the next thought is, if I don't get a 2-1, then I'll never get the job I want, because all these jobs I'm looking at, they all say, oh, must have a 2-1 or above, and maybe I won't get a 2-1 now, so, you know, I'm not going to get that job. And then comes along, well, maybe I won't get a job at all. I mean, and the job climate's bad, and then I'll have to stay living at home. And I'm like, well, that's the worst thing you could possibly imagine, isn't it? So she's gone from, you know, looking at something that may or may not have happened, and now she's going way into the future. You know, the whole of next year she's going to be sitting in her bedroom devastated because she hasn't got a job. Then she's gone back into the past. Why didn't I revise more? If I'd spent more time working, then it wouldn't have got like this. And I did all of that. So, you know, the clouds between her and that peace of mind are getting, you know, thicker and thicker and thicker. And then finally came the real humdinger, and I had to actually stifle myself from laughing, because it just, wow, how do we get here so fast? I'll never fulfill my potential. There was the great big black cloud. So from, I didn't get all those questions right, nobody ever does, she'd got to, I'll never fulfill my potential. And it happens because we take those first thoughts and we look at them as true, and then we think, oh yeah, and what does that mean? And what does that mean? And what does that mean? And that means, and that means, and we've made it all up. And, you know, we're all doing this all the time. And it's part of this misunderstanding that more thinking is helpful. When we start to see more thinking about a thought that's giving us a bad feeling is not helpful, then we catch ourselves more quickly, and we kind of stop ourselves from going up this escalation of feelings. Because if she'd stopped here, with, you know, oh, I didn't get all these questions right. Yeah, okay, well, let's see what happens then. Or even here, you know, I don't think I'll do well in this exam. But actually, I have no idea, because, you know, my husband loves to give the example of the exam that he got 35% in at university and ended up getting a first for it because everyone else did so badly. You know, it's like, we don't know this stuff, but we make it up. So knowing that not escalating our feelings, not escalating, following our thinking down this rabbit hole, that actually is a helpful thing for us. We just stop ourselves that much more quickly. And by the way, my daughter did get the 2-1, and she's now got a job, the job, perfect job that she really wanted, and none of that stuff ever happened. So, well, who knows whether she'll fulfill her potential, but I guess she made that one up too. So, you know, thought storms are something that we all do, and I really wonder what your thought attacks look like. But next time you find yourself in those early stages when the first cloud comes along, just take a look at it and realize, okay, I don't have to go anywhere with this, because thoughts come and go naturally on their own, and if we just don't grab onto them and start doing stuff, you know, something else will be along pretty soon. Just like it was for her, actually, because, you know, the thought storm passed and then she was fine for the next however many weeks until the results came along. So, you know, that is always going to happen, that thought will just pass through. And all that creating of stories about the future and going back into the past, it's just so unhelpful to us, because we're designed to deal with what's in front of us. So much of our stress is about stuff we've made up about the future, or stuff we're recycling from the past. And when we realize that this moment that's in front of us, we can actually handle, life becomes a whole lot simpler. So, you know, this understanding that stress, like all feelings, is an inside job, makes us turn to our state of mind right now to look for change, rather than looking in the wrong place of trying to change the circumstances and everybody else. So I just want to give you a very quick example, which is a client that I've been working with recently, who came to me because she was so stressed about her relationship that she was having panic attacks, she couldn't sleep, she was on medication from her doctor. And it really looked like her stress was coming from her partner, who, you know, by her accounts was controlling and, you know, domineering, and, you know, wouldn't give her the freedom to do the things she wanted to do. You know, there was a whole load of stuff going on. And it really looked like, you know, unless he changed, she couldn't feel any better. That's how it always seems to look. And, you know, she was saying, well, I'm going to have to leave him, aren't I? That looked like the only option, but she didn't want to, because she liked the guy. So she felt she was just really, really stuck. But somehow she was able to see her role in this, the role of thought. And just by stopping looking for the solution in him, suddenly she realized that the way she was responding, because of the way she thought about him and the way she always thought he was going to respond, and the way she thought were the only ways things could work out, that was all made up. And so, you know, when that started to evaporate, she came up with new ways to behave and new strategies for handling her role in the relationship. And it was really extraordinary that within 3 or 4 weeks, the whole thing looked different. And she's saying to me, you know, oh, you know, I'm happier than I've been for years. Well, that's what I call transformation. And that's this shift in consciousness, in seeing, not just in changing a few things, but in seeing a new perspective on how we create our experience. And, you know, I see that time and again. So this has just been like a quick glimpse of a new way of looking at stress, and actually, you know, all our feelings, how any feeling comes to us through this medium of thought. So I just encourage you to kind of start to notice your thinking and notice how much of it actually isn't based in reality. And the more, rather the less time that you spend trying to fix the things that look as if they're the problem, the more your state of mind will change. That's the place you need to look to as your key leverage point. So I hope that you've heard something there that you find helpful. If you're curious to learn more, then check out my podcast. I'll put a link in the chat in a minute. And I've got some free resources on my website, so I'll post a link to that as well. But, you know, I'm really happy to answer any questions, and, you know, or if there's something that you'd like to chat to me about, you know, happy to send me an email, and happy to have a conversation anytime.
Brilliant.
So
Thank you
very much.
Thanks. That was really good. Thank you very much.